Give me your potted analysis of what you heard on defence spending.
I'm old enough and ugly enough now, John, to have listened to a lot of these announcements. There's big numbers, but actually, I'm interested in really what they mean. For example, 11 billion over 5 years sounds fantastic, but
Mm.
if you look at the rate of inflation of 11%, in other words, everything the military buys is 11% more expensive. That's about, based on the defence budget, about 42 billion. That's about 4.6 billion a year extra. So 5 years, that would be 23 billion extra just to stand still. So 11 billion is only half that amount. So from a military perspective, it looks like we're worse than standing still.
Yes.
The danger is it's that with the war in Ukraine, with the invasion of Russia, a lot of this is about how do we invest more in defence. This doesn't sound like it's an investment more in defence.
Well, is it possible, given the numbers that we heard today, for the British military to carry on being the kind of strategic and military force that it wants to be, that it has been in the past? We've had a lot of talk about the British military capability being hollowed out, no longer a first tier force. Is that your reading now, and is that reversible?
And bluntly, no. I mean, whilst as a military guy, I'd always want to have more money in defence. I'm also a taxpayer. I also use the NHS, and I realise that there are some very difficult challenges that any government has to make about where it allocates spending. I think we first priority for our nation has got to be defence of our realm, and I think we do a really good job of that. But we're an island nation, so we face very different challenges to Europe. We pay more than our fair share in NATO. We've always been above the 2%, and this recent announcement takes us even higher. Whereas a number of our European colleagues, like Germany, have only been spending virtually half that amount on defence.
Yes.
And they're a lot closer to the potential invasion of Russia. So I do think we've got to be careful as a nation not to end up subsidising our European colleagues. They
Mm.
need to pay their way. But also, I think there is a sense of how we make sure we spend our money smarter. So I'm not an advocate for just keep piling more money in because it's got to come from somewhere else. But I do think we've got to be careful to make sure we spend what we've got more smartly.
But realistically, Sean, is this fair? We're not going to end up in a situation where the forces of the United Kingdom are going to end up in a war fighting alone, Britain against whoever it happens to be. We have to be capable of being a part of the NATO alliance and playing an active part in a combined operation, maybe in a war involving our 30 odd NATO allies. Are we capable of doing that?
Absolutely, and John, you've expressed it very clearly. We do not have to be experts to be able to provide every single element of the warfighting capability at scale. What we've got to be able to do is contribute meaningfully to an alliance, and we have lots of very capable military capability to offer the alliance. I'd also offer that what the Russian invasion of Ukraine has shown us is that Russia fights a sort of almost medieval warfare, just throwing people at the fight. They don't care about human life. Whereas ever since the end of the First World War, when we saw some horrible casualties, the West has tried to use technology to limit the number of casualties we face. And therefore, we've got lots of technological services like the Royal Air Force, like space, like the Navy, and parts of the Army. And that's where we need to contribute the most. It isn't
Yes.
necessarily whole brigades of manpower where we actually, as a nation, have limited appetite for casualties. So I'm not advocating a reduction in any particular service. I'm just saying the way we have learned to fight battles is
Yes.
very different than the way that Russia does. And that's why we need technology on our side.
Okay, Sean, Lucy Fisher's here with me, our chief political commentator, also a former defence editor, so knows a lot more about defence and strategic matters than I do. But that's not difficult, Lucy.
Hi, Sean. I wanted to ask you
I,
if you agreed with something that Labour MPs have said to me today, which is that they think it is unacceptable that the government is giving 1.9 billion pounds to the MOD to replenish materiel that we've donated to Ukraine. They think that that should come from the Treasury's contingency reserves and shouldn't come from the MOD's departmental budget. Would you agree with that?
Listen. I try very hard not to get involved in politics with any of this. I think the bottom line is that if we are going to support Ukraine, that has inevitably meant a lot of our weapons being taken out of stockpiles, and they need to be replaced. Because, bluntly, when I was in the Ministry of Defence as a head of capability, we didn't have the money to buy spare equipment. We only had in our inventory our war stock, sufficient stocks, and slightly less than sufficient to do what we needed to do. So there's a degree of urgency of replenishing that. But actually, behind the headlines, as ever with these things, the sort of equipment that we have provided Ukraine has often been some of our older equipment that we were looking to replace that still was very capable, but we wanted to have the next technological breakthrough. For example, anti-tank weapons. Most of our anti-tank weapons were nearly 20 years old. If you imagine what your mobile phone was 20 years ago, technology's moved on a pace. So there is an element of this about by giving some stuff to Ukraine, we've given ourselves the opportunity to upgrade, and therefore there's a real conversation about whether that money should be fresh money or whether it should actually come out of the MOD coffers. And I absolutely wouldn't want to get involved in a political debate between the opposition and the Conservatives.
Well, I'm John Pienaar, and if you found that interesting, we are here each day, Monday to Thursday, 5 o'clock till 7 o'clock on Drive, and from 7 till 8, Pienaar and Friends, where we discuss the big stories of the day each day on Times Radio.